Welcome to the Property Management Show, where we deep dive into the world of property management and entrepreneurship. Your hosts are Marie Tepman and Brittany Jones from Four and Half Marketing Agency. Since 2012, Four and Half has helped hundreds of property managers like you get more owner leads through digital marketing. Whether you need help with a website, SEO, social media, video and blog content, online reputation, paid advertising like Google Ads, you name it, we can do it. Visit fourandhalf.com to get your property management company growing today. That's fourandhalf.com. So we recently had a conversation with Ray Hespen, the CEO and co-founder of Property Meld. And in typical fashion, we had such a good conversation that we had to split the long interview into two parts. So in part one, we talk more about maintenance analytics, what that is, and what it can do to a property management company. And then this one is part two, where we talk more about the current shortage in labor for tradespeople, for vendors, what it's doing to NOI, and what property managers can do about it.
Like, have you seen data related to preventative maintenance that kind of like surprised you, or you were like, oh, I would never have thought that that was connected?
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. It actually came to owner retention or investor retention. So again, a lot of the third-party property management, yes, there's institutionals, but a large segment is made up of those people that own between 1 to 4 units. One of the things that was one of the most startling things that we learned is that owners in the renewing cohort, so owners that renewed 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, versus those that churned within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. The ones that renew had a higher maintenance per unit per year rate, highest maintenance performed. So meaning the amount of actions taken on their property that were related to maintenance were higher by like 20%. So we're like sitting there going, well, that's odd. So if you have more maintenance done, retention is better. But if you go with the spend, the actual spend is lower. So if you're doing more action at a lower cost is your ultimate best indicator for renewal. And so then when you go dig into those accounts, the ones that had more and less spend tended to be ones with more preventative repairs. And so it all kind of ties back into kind of that data correlation that if you drive your spend per unit down to a reasonable level, not to zero, and your resident satisfaction is at the level you like, what's the behavior that triggers that is more behavior or more preventative programs. But the amount of work done on a unit per year equals higher retention was probably one of the weirdest moments where I'm like, that can't be right. This has to be wrong. Somebody ran the data wrong, and we had to like go dive into it a little bit. And yeah, so that's like a perfect example.
Yeah, and I think you shared that like statistic in our last podcast interview with you. And so I'm, out of curiosity, I wanted to kind of like dig a bit deeper into that.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that, I follow you on LinkedIn and you talk about how it's just getting more and more expensive, right, to maintain properties. It's harder to find people to do the repairs because they're so on demand. They're not running out of jobs. And so their prices are going high. It's supply and demand. And so given that, the data says, the more kind of touches you have, the more maintenance activities you have, while keeping the cost of maintenance per unit as low as you can for the year, but the economy is not making it easy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any insights related to that? Like, how are property managers still able to do that?
So I'll tell you more, and I can't give you the perfect answer about how everybody solves this, but there was just a report released where Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent are basically giving their year-to-date sentiment and like what they're forecasting for the rest of the year, both in revenue and expenses. And expenses, I forget how much they're going up significantly, and revenue is basically holding steady or slightly decreasing. And so their NOI as a percentage is dropping from like 11% to like 5% in a year. So this is industry-wide challenge. And so then you have to sit there and go, all right, I either can try bolstering revenue or I can try basically controlling expenses. And in an economy where tradespeople prices are going up, and so there's really only a couple things you can do. One, keep the renters in the unit. I had an interesting conversation with somebody, and hopefully this is relevant. I had a conversation with a brilliant person. They were saying they could get a price increase in rent if they got the lease to renew. But if the lease went on the market, there'd be inevitably a stagnation or even potentially a price cut. So renewals are starting to be a very, very important part of the revenue generation and expense, right? Because you got to do a turnover. And the maintenance side of things, you have to ultimately find ways to get work into the shoulder months, which is basically your before summer and your after summer. So you have to find a way to magically make work on those one of two. And the only way that you can do that is by doing work that normally happens during the summer in one of those months, for example, HVAC, or doing inspections semi-annually that ultimately land on the shoulder months that you can do some of these repairs when the workload isn't as steep. And so those are really only the two things that operationally people can focus on. Data in itself is not going to tell you like specifically how to do that. You just know from an operations standpoint, keep residents happy, allow them to renew the lease. That's really important for investors. And then the second thing, get more preventative programs that ultimately land on the shoulder months.
That's really good. And so I know that, you keep talking about how you have access to a lot of data with regard to residents and maintenance performed on the properties because, Property Meld has so many units in its system. But you also have many tradespeople in your system because that's basically what you do. You connect both of them. And so any interesting insights you've seen, patterns emerging on the tradespeople side?
Yeah, so I'll give you probably more qualitative and less quantitative. Quantitative is invoice prices are going up. Speeds of repairs are decreasing as that market's constrained, and as it's relieved a little bit, speed of repair improves. I will tell you the biggest thing that I think a lot of people in the industry are having to do is how do you make sure that vendors prefer to work with you and not prefer to, not put burden on them. So if you even think about 3-4 years ago, I even remember talking to some property management firms that put a lot of legal requirements. You had to insure based on the name of us. I need you to accept something within 2 hours, or I kick you out. If you don't give me this, I don't pay you. Terms of kind of a terms of service type agreement with the vendor. That is all but evaporated. You have to find a way to make it easier to work with you. So one of the things that we care about is vendors really like our platform. I mean, we got around 40,000 vendors in our platform. Taking away some of the stuff that they have to do that they don't make any money, scheduling, communication, all those things. The more you can grease the skids on those things and they want to work with you, the better luck you have. We've spent a lot of time researching the vendor network, and a lot of people think that, oh, well, I'm just going to give them more work. They have more work than they know what to do with, and one of their largest challenges is finding people to do the work. So you have to find a way to make that same hour more valuable to them and easier for them than the other person. And that's more qualitative, which we think we're leaning into, but that's going to be the big war over the next 5 years, is making sure that you have a really healthy vendor network, really healthy technician throughput, because that's probably not going to get any easier from a resource standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And so do you think price is the biggest driver of, vendors preferring to work with a property management company versus another, versus getting their own, because they can get their own projects? There's just so much work to be had.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenging things is people don't realize the retail industry. So when I say retail, it's like the consumer. So Marie or Brittany or myself, if we sit there and call somebody, we actually pay more for a plumbing job than a property manager does. And that's one of the benefits of working with a property manager. They negotiate good rates, they build relationships. And So they have to realize that they're choosing to do this for something. And what is it? One of the big things is they get recurring work, right? Property managers generate a consistent amount of work. They don't have to go hunt for the thing. You're just going to give it to them. That you can usually define systems and processes that allow them to not have to like update the property manager on what's going on. Scheduling is really easy, all that sort of stuff, right? And so I don't think I'm probably answering your question, but I think the big thing is you have to grease the skids, because the alternative is they go to the retail side, make more money. And so leaning into what actually makes it special to work for a property manager, it's like continuing to lean on that and not make it a burden.
Yeah. Like non-monetary incentives.
Brittany, I should have just said that. You just shortcut. Like, that is perfect. It's all the other stuff.
Right here.
I will say I did talk to somebody who helps stand up trades companies, and they're like, most of the vendors in our platform, the vast majority have less than 10 employees. These are small operations. They're not these large national. And if you go, why did you start a plumbing company? Why did you start an electrician company? It's because I wanted to go to my kid's soccer game. It's because I want to be able to control my own calendars, because I want. And so the motivations of those businesses are different than somebody who is institutionally backed, who's trying to drive a profit number, right? And sometimes it's really hard in property management to not realize that and go, but I'm giving you more work. It's like, yeah, right, but I want to go to my kid's soccer game. And so that control of the calendar. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I could imagine stuff like how regularly does it happen where a vendor goes to a property and they need access, but the renter isn't there, or whatever situations, right? So it's like, I feel like that's something that is important to them, because then they missed the kids' soccer game because they were waiting around for somebody to go to the property. Is that like one of the things that would factor into it?
That is all those friction points. So scheduling, and that's one of the things we brag on. 85% of repairs are scheduled in less than 4 minutes without a phone call. Like, they don't make any money doing that. They're chasing people back and forth. So that's one. Updating the property manager. Hey, what's going on? Or having the property manager not having to constantly call them and say, hey, where are you at with this?
Right.
That's a friction point, right? Making sure that invoices are sent easily, they get paid in a timely manner. That's all important. So anytime you have those friction points on communication, scheduling, information sharing, just makes the life more complicated. And again, when they're able to choose from all the work that they want to do, you have to find a way to make yourself preferred in the realm that they find value, which is they just want to do their job, show up, control their calendar, make money in the hours that they're doing, and make renters happy. And so anything that's friction upon that is a huge risk.
Yeah. Totally makes sense, because I feel like just in general, like as a society, like that's kind of where everybody's moving, where it's like you want to make good money, but you don't want to have to deal with a bunch of jerks or deal with like bad schedules and incompetent people or rude people, or like, that's where we're at. That's where we're at. So it makes sense.
Yeah. And even, we had a good conversation last week around, really, really smart people about, isn't a recession looming? There's a lot of people that are probably not going to get that choice, but in the trades, the amount of backlog and the shortage of tradespeople is so drastic. You would have to have catastrophic levels of recession to ultimately do that. So this is even if or when, whatever your take is, I think a recession is looming. That's one that is not going to get easier still. So,
yep,
a little bit of breathing room, but not much.
Out of curiosity, do you have any like personal insight, or maybe you've picked it up from other connections? Like, what is the reason that trades are still short? Because I know that when we spoke about this during COVID, we talked about how there's going to be this big kind of like boom of maintenance requests, because everyone's kind of waiting until like, they feel safe to report. But I could imagine it's already, you already talked about how like all the backlog from that point had kind of already passed through the system. And now there's this like new crisis of like, well, there's just isn't enough labor. But why is it? Did a bunch of technicians just retire like during COVID?
So there's definitely people who shut down businesses during COVID, maybe got different jobs because they got to feed their families or whatever. And again, I'm going general hypotheses, so take it for what it's worth. The other thing is there was a massive amount of capital injected into the economy. Lowe's, Home Depot reporting massive revenue growth from people wanting to do Home Depot or, home improvement projects. You had that. Institutional capital was borrowing money at an astronomical level. Build to rent is a thing now. So you have entire new industry of build to rent, which is also driving demand. And then you take the last part, which is just the pipeline of talent. It is still not cool in America to go be an electrician. Like the pressure, societal pressure, and there's plenty of studies on this. Like people would rather go and get a psychology degree, go 100 grand in debt still, and go make 40 grand a year. When there's somebody can go to a trade school for 15 grand and in 2 years they're making 6 figures, that societal attitude hasn't shifted. So between those 3 indicators, makes it at least pretty evident to me that there's that's what's creating a lot of it. But again, I'm going kind of in hypothesis there, but seems to track.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I feel
So you're telling us we should switch careers too and become an electrician.
It's not. I'll tell you. So I do Big Brothers Big Sisters. Admittedly, not as much as I should, but my little one day was talking about. I was like, "Are you going to go to school or something?" He's like, "I'm going to go become an electrician." And I was like my immediate instinct was to be like, "Why don't you go to college?" And I was like, then I'm thinking about our business. I said, "That's actually awesome. Good for you.
Yeah,
Just make sure you go to good school.
Yeah.
Get I had to curb my own natural thing,
Right.
which was pretty interesting. Yeah,
That's cool that you caught it though too, and you're like, no, that's great.
that's awesome. You should.
Yeah.
It's gonna be 2 years. Learn under somebody smart. Make sure you know how to do math, but it's not as complicated as a lot that collegiate systems require. So
Yeah, but that just tells me, right? Like, it's going to take a while. It's going to get worse before it gets better, because even if we encourage more like kids now to go to trade school and kind of like fill that gap, it's going to take time for them to like be trained and then like study under like those that are already licensed, get licensed,
Grow up.
grow
Yeah.
up. Yeah. And so
yeah.
I need to.
And-
How old was this kid? Well, what do we have? 10 years.
So and I think we've kind of approached it like we're not going to work to solve that. But I think one of the things that's really important is a property meld. Again, 40,000 vendors. There's a significant growing number of vendors that serve multiple property management companies. And so our idea is if we can help these vendors complete more jobs in the same hour, that's a way to artificially inflate capacity, right, with the same resourcing. So we're looking to take an approach that way. They're amazing professionals. And if we can help them get more jobs done in the same hour and make more money and bill more, and property managers have more capacity out of that one vendor, everybody wins. So that's kind of the more short-term approaches that we're going after.
Yeah, because you're right. They don't get paid for the time that they like drive and they schedule, and then they have to go back because people aren't ready. And like, I don't know if it's relevant, but I have friends in the home health industry, and it's a similar thing. It's like they're paid for the time they spend treating the patient in their home, and so the scheduling, the driving around, and then typically when they are employed, no one like assists them in scheduling and making sure that the patients they see every day are like in close distance. So like even my brother, he used to do the home health thing, and he would drive like an hour sometimes to see the second patient. That like, yes, you're reimbursed for the gas and everything, but he would have made more money if he had a patient that was like close by. And so even just they kept pushing like, I wish there was like technology AI that could just like, you could just feed all the patients there and they just magically like schedule like who's close to each other. Are you guys working on that for tradespeople?
A great application for AI, actually. We're not, there's a lot of hype over AI. Scheduling is such a great application.
Are you guys working on that?
There's foundational stuff. So we're looking at different applications of AI that are meaningful. And I've talked pretty heavily about it. Data is the big thing that's missing to make maintenance really exceptional from an aspect, because you have to train these AI models on the data to ultimately make some decisions. But there's a foundational element of, we have a lot more vendors that are doing a very large portion of their work on Property Meld. And when you start to kind of manage more throughput, that's when you can start having meaningful impact. And so there's a lot of cool things we're looking into now. I'll start talking about it when I feel like it's getting close, so it's not things that we're spouting off that are going to happen and never come to fruition.
That's great. And so I have one final question before we end. And so what is your advice to our listeners who may be scared to look at data because they feel like, it's going to go over my head or it's too overwhelming? Like, how can they get started on using data to help them make decisions, even if they're not data mavens?
I think that's a big thing. So one, we've always designed in the way that you shouldn't be a data scientist to be able to understand what's happening in your business. So that's one. But I would say there's a lot more fear in people viewing their own data and concerns of what they'll find. And I think that's where a lot of people really struggle. Like, I'm scared to see it because I don't know. And anybody who's like pulled back the covers on anything is kind of like, what am I going to find? Right. But there's a great book, Good to Great, Jim Collins, talks about great companies accept the brutal truth. So the first and foremost things is just see yourself as it is and know that's a huge step in making your business better. It's okay to know what you're good at and what you're bad at. And I think a lot of people are scared because there's a story they've been telling and now they have to go, does the data tell the same story? And I'm terrified it's not going to. But most importantly, go see, learn about yourself. You will never be a great company if you don't acknowledge the hard truths in your business. So I would say, first of all, any data that's worth its weight in whatever is easy enough to read. But I think that's going to be the bigger obstacle of people sitting there going, but, just look at it and be knowledgeable that it's okay if you've got something bad. Everything can be fixed.
Yeah, I think that's really profound, right? I think it's very human to be afraid to realize that we're not as good as we think we are. I think psychologically, I heard a podcast about how the best athletes are actually lie more to themselves than subpar athletes. It's because there's something that happens in our brains when we are very hyper aware of our limitations. So we're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to finish this race. I'm not going to be able to finish this race. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy versus people who are a bit more optimistic are like, I'm number one. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then, when there are moments when they kind of want to give up, we're like, no, but I can do it. I'm number one. Versus people are like, see, like my legs are already aching. And then it's like, I think like they did the analysis on a bunch of athletes. And if you just look at people's track records and everything, and then they kind of measured like how often they lie to themselves, they found there was a correlation between how much you lie to yourself and how successful you are, which is really interesting.
Yeah. And as an entrepreneur, and as a lot of entrepreneurs in our industry, like, you have to be an overabundance of optimism to like grow a business out of nothing, right? But there's a point where it's like, okay, I've got to just see myself for what it is and just know where the areas are and know what to work on. And that's a tough transition, speaking from personal experience. And maybe the reason I'm saying it's hard to look at the data sometimes is because we've had to go through that journey ourselves and be like, what are we actually good at and what are we really crummy at? And are we willing to accept the answers that data is sharing with us? And that actually took a little bit of growing up for us to do. And so maybe I'm just projecting, and maybe that's not the biggest challenge, but I know for us, that was a big challenge. Like, hey, it's okay if it's bad. Let's just be honest what it is.
Because then you won't know how to improve, right? If you don't know if it's bad, then you don't know if you need to change something.
Yep, we'll excuse it away.
Yeah, can't change what you can't measure. Well, really appreciate you spending time with us today, Ray, to talk all about maintenance analytics.
And that's all we have for this episode of the Property Management Show. As a reminder, this podcast is brought to you by Fore and Taft Marketing Agency. Since 2012, we have helped hundreds of property managers like you grow their businesses by getting more owner leads from digital marketing. Whether you need help with your website, your SEO, your online reputation, video and blog content, social media, pay-per-click advertising like Google Ads, you name it, we can help you. Visit foreandhalf.com to learn more. That's FOURANDHALF.com. And if you have any feedback, suggestions, feel free to email marketing@foreandhalf.com. We would love to hear from you. And if you are enjoying our show, please show us some love by leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much, and see you next time.